Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome to a trade/session recap for Euro Dollar during the London session on Wednesday, the 17th of August 2022. So, daily chart is pretty damn simple, right? We're bearish. We pull back up to the premium supply range. It's pretty likely now that price is going to want to go down and target that weak swing low, right? But like I've been saying, the internal structure is bullish, right? We can see we've had that internal higher high, internal higher low, internal higher high. So until we get that break and closure below that low, that's only when we have sort of true confirmation with the framework that I use, that then we would then expect those internal ranges to hold to take out that weak low, because there is a small possibility that this internal low could hold, right? Because it's a strong internal low, because it took out the internal high, and there's that possibility that we could have, a continued swing pull back up to these more premium levels of supply. But as things stand, right, we've had a pretty decent reaction, and the lower time frames are looking pretty bearish. But you just have to be open, to both possibilities. There is still demand within this range. This low hasn't gone yet, and there is some possibility we could get that move. But even if we do start to move up, we've also had this level of supply that did cause a bearish shock. So potentially we could even see something like that. But remember, swing structure is king. It's always the most powerful. The bigger picture is overwhelmingly bearish, and we have had a corrective pullback into premium supply. So that's why I'm always going to lean more towards now that the internal structure is likely to switch bearish. But obviously we can wait until we get that true confirmation, until we get a closure below. Also, we can use lower time frames obviously to help guide us as well. So for our chart, swing structure is basically the same as the daily chart, just slightly smaller leg, where we have this leg here. We've had that pretty corrective pullback up into that daily supply range. So just looking to see now, is this pullback over, and are we ready to take out that weak swing low? The 4-hour internal structure also shifted bullish, right, to facilitate that swing pullback. So now that we've come up to a premium level of supply, that's when there's an increased probability that the internal structure is going to shift trend, where price may want to take out this strong 4-hour internal low. And then once we get that break and closure below, then we expect those bearish internal ranges to hold until it takes out the swing low, right? Because when we're starting to buy from those strong internal highs that have been taking out those weak lows. So that's kind of what my expectation is, especially with the way in which we've sold off so aggressively. We have tons of liquidity to target. We've even had a little bit of reaction from that low, so we may just be building even more, liquidity to go. So even though that's my main gut feel, that's my main forecast, we still have to be always open to both the bullish and bearish scenarios, and also not to assume structure is going to shift until it actually does, until we actually get that confirmation. Because although price was selling off aggressively, we never actually got a closure below this low. Price hasn't even spiked through it just yet, and it has held so far. And if I just zoom in, right, into this current range that we're playing with, the low ended up holding, right, as we can see, it didn't trade below, and we have now had that bullish 4-hour change of character. Now, what we usually work with, right, is when we have this larger internal structure, right, and price comes in, usually you'll get some like small internal structure from within here, right? Like I'm drawing here, imagine if you get this. So now as price comes into this large internal low, ideally what we like to see is then we get a break of the small internal structure. So the small internal structure shifts bullish here, right, which then signals the end of that large internal pullback, right? And then we have a lot more confirmation that now we expect those small internal bullish ranges to hold until we take out that high. But in this instance, because it's pretty much kind of just one leg down, we don't have a lot of structure to work with. Arguably, like that was the start of that small internal structure, and it kind of got a movement here, but then that's not that clear. I guess what I'm trying to ask myself is this pullback here as significant as this pullback here? I don't know. It's not great. So we don't have a lot to work with in that instance, and that's kind of why I don't have a super clear view yet. And I'm really kind of just viewing this 4-hour chock as pretty much just price just chocking to pull back to supply, whether it be this level or potentially this level, right, to then continue that movement. So it's the first kind of bullish signal that potentially this low might be holding, right? So we can maybe look for a move into here, right, and see if we can start to clear out these levels of supply. I just don't have a very high conviction either way at the moment, in terms of like the immediate sort of 4-hour bias if we're looking at these levels. And this is kind of why coming to Frankfurt, I just didn't really like it. It was kind of, okay, well, I can look for a sell into here, then potentially see how it sets up, and then we look for a little long. But I'm not too sure. So I'm going to take my profits pretty quickly, and I'm not swinging for anything. It's all going to be sort of intra-session trades. But whenever you're not confused, like one, you don't need to trade it, right, until you have a clear bias. But two, swing structure is king, as I keep saying, right? The overall bigger picture is that we've had that swing pullback up to premium supply. We've sold off pretty aggressively. So, that's why my gut feel is we're probably just having a quick bounce, and then we may be ready to then have that larger move. So yeah, that would be my main sort of thesis, is we probably are going to sell off, but we haven't had that bearish break of the large internal structure just yet. And yeah, it's a little bit unclear to me. So I'm just kind of looking for those quicker moves, right? Now, if we jump down to the M15, I had my M15 swing structure mapped as bearish. If I zoom out, right, you can see where I started it from, where we had that big break up here. But then I just kind of, to me, it makes a bit more sense, and it keeps things a little bit more simple if I stick to the M15 swings being reasonably conservative. I know some people wanted to keep their swing low down here. So when we got that break of this high here, right, at this moment when we broke above, where is the swing low? Well, it's the lowest point. Sorry, excuse me. It would be left here, right? It's the lowest point that took out that high. If you had that as your swing high. But then it just gets very, very tricky when you have all of this is the internal. So for me, it just makes a little bit more sense to keep things simple, and just focus on the slightly smaller swings, right? And that's where I called this as a swing pullback. Then we shifted bearish. Then we had the pullback up into that strong high. Then we pulled down, right? And then I'm just looking at these as our swings. So following on from that, right, we had another clear swing and then a push down. But then this is where it got, a little bit, if you don't have mechanical rules in terms of what you deem to be significant enough for a swing pullback, this is one of those ones where you kind of and ahhing, and I wasn't, too sure. So the way I kind of did this in my head, right, is I go, okay, well, I'm going to leave this as my swing high. I'm not going to view that as significant enough for a pullback. It's more of just an internal pullback, right? But when it's kind of like a pullback where I'm not quite sure if it could be swing or not, I'm just viewing that then when price does break it as pretty significant. So this is kind of where you have to just, I guess, just be open to the possibility that yes, this is an M15 strong high, but I wouldn't be overly surprised if price broke it. So to keep it even more simple, I'm viewing that as the large internal structure, which did shift bullish for a bit, but then it shifted back bearish, right? So then we have this movement here, and then we break up to the upside. So now at this point, I am viewing this as the M15 swing high, but if this internal structure keeps staying bullish, then I wouldn't be too surprised if it failed, especially as we're coming off that strong 4-hour internal low. And this is an area in which, if the M15 is going to switch bullish, this is likely where it's going to happen, right? Because the 4-hour internal larger structure would have to stay bullish from this level. Just put my phone on silent. Okay, so let's not confuse any of you who's maybe finding these scenarios a little bit tricky, and let's just run with, right, this is our swing high, this is our swing low, the M15 is bearish. Okay, for the M15 to have that swing pullback up into premium supply, what typically is going to happen? Well, we'll get the internal structure shifting bullish, which is obviously what's happened here. So when we come up into Frankfurt today, which is where I brought price back, the simple assumption is, well, we've had a swing lower low, we've pulled back up into that premium supply. So let's keep it simple. We can assume now that it's likely the swing lower high may form, and now we can go on to target that weak M15 swing low. And that's absolutely fine. But when we start to bring in internal structure, what we can see is that this was that bullish internal breaker structure to the upside. So this becomes a strong internal low, but it's also the weak M15 swing low. And it makes sense, right? Because at this point, the M15 swing is bearish, but the M15 internal is bullish. So we have structure, misaligned. It's not aligned, and that's when it gets a bit tricky, because this could stay bullish, and it's only once we get that internal structure shifting bearish that then signals the M15 swing pullback has now likely finished, and then we expect that large internal structure to stay bearish to then take out the swing low. So when the internal structure is still bullish like it currently is, that's when I can't have high confidence to want to get short and try and target that weak swing low, because this can still do this because it's still bullish. So that's why this is labeled as a weak large internal high. This high is weak because it has not broken the internal low, right? All this high here has done is it's just broken that chalk, right? That fractal structure. That's all it's done. So yes, this can hold, right? Because it's part of the supply chain. We have pulled back up to the premium supply, 4-hour supply as well, and we could roll over. But from an internal structure perspective, I don't have a lot of confidence in this level because it's a weak high. So this is where you may want to be a bit more aggressive, and you go, well, the supply chain could hold, right? It's likely we pulled back. So, you want to get in shorts from within here and anticipate that move. Or maybe you just think, right, we're going to get that move that's a little bit deeper, and you can just play that. So that's fine. I'm just trying to make the point. It's just a little bit tricky, right? Because you are technically trading from a weak high. So let's use the arrows, because that can sometimes help people to visualize it, right? So if we think of this as the string structure, we've had the swing pullback now, right? And now we may be ready to go and have that movement. So let's put that as black. Let's just make it thin. Okay, so that would be the swing pullback. Now you can map the let's map this as blue. Make it maybe a little bit thicker, right? And then you have the internal structure, right? Has shifted because we had it here. It shifted bullish, but then it shifted back bearish, right? So you have the internal structure shifting bullish as it breaks this high to facilitate the black swing pullback, the M15 swing pullback, okay? But because this is bullish, right, the expectation is we may just have a pullback into this demand, right, into the strong blue internal high low, right? And then we could get that movement here to take out the weak high and then push up to this level, right? So that's one forecast for what we'd expect of the blue structure, which is the large M15 internal structure. Okay, so that's cool. So this is what I was saying, right? You could short from here, but this is a weak high from the internal structure perspective. So, you know, from the blue structure perspective, we potentially expect that to fail, right? But maybe because we haven't pulled back that deep into the discount, right? This could just do this, right? And then go, okay? So this is where you can either get short, but I personally wanted to wait for a bit more confirmation. So if we look at the small internal structure of the blue structure, let's use green for this. All right, and then you look, right, price comes back. It doesn't close below that low, right? So I've just kept it simple and drawn this as the low. Right, if we come back and then get a green bearish eyeballs here, now what's happened is that structure has shifted bearish to facilitate the pullback, right, of this blue structure. So then when this shifts bullish, if we get a break of here, then we expect these bullish ranges to hold until it takes out the blue high, right? Until it takes out that high. So that's how you have to think about those pieces of structure in your mind if you're going to map this and trade this. Okay, so we have the black swing structure, which is basically just looking for the swing lower low, pull back into here, and then that movement. But then we also have the blue structure, right, which is bullish. So we're expecting that pullback to then potentially take out that weak high, which is why shorting from here initially, you know, it's not as high probability as what it could be because you're trading from a weak high. And then you also have the green structure, which potentially could shift bearish, right, to then facilitate that movement down towards these levels to facilitate that larger pullback of the blue structure, right? I appreciate this gets a bit confusing. And then if that shifts bullish, then we know we can take out that high, okay? This might make a bit more sense as we start to play price forward. And you don't have to get this complicated with internal structure, but for me, you know, it helps to make sense of a lot of situations. But if all of that's confusing and all of that's gone off your head, the one thing I want you to take from this is yes, we have had a swing pullback up to premium supply. We do expect this high to hold if you map this as your swing structure, and we do expect that movement. But at this very point in price, this is a weak high and it hasn't achieved enough, right? It's only caused a break of this. So yes, this can play out, but it's just lower probability. Right, and that's why I would have preferred price to come up to here and then look for the shorts from here, because then I can get short and at least play the pullback into what would have been the strong internal low with the potential that we may then get that bearish eyeball somewhere ready to take out that swing low. So that's why if I don't have a good read and I think this is a weak high, I'm happy to sit in my hands and either wait. At this moment, I was waiting for price to either come up to here or ideally we get a break of that low. Right, so then we get the green small internal structure shifting bearish. Now we have a strong small internal high to trade from, right? And we can look for that movement into here, right? And then look for the long. So you have that. And that's essentially what I was waiting for. So I wanted more development at this point. There was nothing really that appealing to me to want to trade at this point. It's all a little bit not great. Now, you would have seen in my analysis me draw on a zone like this demand. These are types of zones, all you have to understand is just because I draw on a POI, it does not mean I actually want to trade from it. I'm just drawing on the fact that there's demand here and it's useful information because one, it means, you know, if you did want to get short from within here, do you really want to trade into this anyway, even if you are happy to trade from this weak large internal high? But two, you know, if we start to see this fail or we see price come in, react and then give the flip, well now, you know, we've got a bit more of a useful POI to trade from. That's all it is, okay? I just don't know if anyone would see this and think, oh, that means Matt wants to long from here. You know, definitely not, okay? Cool, so let's play this forward as we kind of come into Frankfurt Open. So again, not too surprising, right? We take the high, sweep the high, then we come into demand. Again, nothing of interest for me. I don't personally want to trade this. Okay, now it's getting a bit more interesting because we have a bearish chalk and we've seen this demand fail. But at this point, I'm not even really looking at this too much, but at this point, this is still a weak high, right? There's still a weak high, so I don't really have that much conviction to want to get involved yet because we haven't had a break of structure. But now we get this break, or we try to break below here. Excuse me, actually, sorry, forget that. I think I did look to get involved below here. Let me just check the M5. Once we had that chalk and demand fail, is it going to load for me? Let's see how it looked. I think this is where I got sucked in a little bit on the M5. Let's have a look. No, it wasn't yet. Okay, so I'm just going to play this forward to where it was. So this point, yeah. Okay, this is, yeah, so I was right. Thank goodness for that, because at least I wasn't a complete idiot today. So yeah, so this is when I got a lot more interested. Because then once we started to try and take out this low, okay, now I am still expecting this larger internal structure to do something like this, but we can look to play this bearish internal structure to facilitate that pullback right down into this level. So essentially at this point, what I'm looking to do is just play the continuation of that move down into here for like a quick scalp, right? Like get short here and then literally just target this low if I can get at least 5R, risk to reward. Okay, so let's run our analysis. So we do have this level as well, because if we could get a break and closure below, I'm not sure it does. I think it gets it, not yet. Here, okay, let's bring it back a couple. I'll just talk you through my exact thought process and then we'll come back to that. So at this point, I think I was starting to look for shorts. It's only when the M5, yeah, looked clear, because then we had M5 supply, right? So this is now where it can start to build a bit more of a bigger picture, and this is basically what I was trying to follow, was just trying to follow this order flow. Now, before we even drop down to the M1 or even the M5, the reason why this is low probability is because after we have that break, that internal break of structure, yes, we didn't close below yet on the M15, so it's not actually a confirmed IBOS, but the fact is we have broken past this level, past where this liquidity is. So what do we expect after breaking that? We expect a pullback of that internal structure, right? We expect price to ideally do that. And that's ideally what I would have waited for. I would have been patient. I would have waited for price to come up to here. But I was kind of just trying to follow the momentum, trying to follow that M5 order flow and look for a quick scalp to basically target that low and then potentially get outright full profits before maybe that pullback kicks in. So hopefully you can understand as to why that is not high probability compared to what we can wait for. So this is what I saw at this moment. We saw the M5 supply. You start to build a bit of a story on the M1, right? We have this supply chain forming. Right, and then basically just set my limit order here. Now even this, I still was really uneasy setting this. I kind of knew you had that inner talk in my head that I knew this wasn't high probability for the reasons we've just gone through. But also, this POI, it didn't sweep any liquidity. There's no inducement in the leg. Perfect sort of equal highs behind it. This is just about as aggressive as I'm ever going to get, really. And fortunately, I didn't get tagged because, it's not the best trade at all. But as soon as we broke that low, cancelled the order, right? Obviously, you need to, we've had another formation of structure on the M5, and now we have another POI. So this is where I wanted to just keep following M5 order flow, even though I knew this wasn't the best at all. Let's just keep it nice and simple with M15 colors. But the M15, if we look here now we actually have, because we did just about break below that low, now we actually have a confirmed IBOS of that green structure, right? If I use different of the small structure, right, to facilitate that largest internal pullback. Okay, so now this high here becomes our M15 strong internal high. Okay, so this is a strong internal high because it took out the low, right? So essentially we're looking at this structure here. That's why it's strong, because it's taken out this low. So from this structure's perspective, we could expect price to come into here and then potentially continue that move. But the problem is that the larger internal structure is still bullish and this is a weak high. So from the larger structure, what do we expect? We expect price to pull back and then take out that high. But if you're then looking at the smaller structure from within here, you're now trying to sell from what technically is a strong small high, but the bigger picture is this. So this is where you have the mixed narrative, structures misaligned. Also the fact that we've had a deeper pullback into the discount of this leg, right? If we put on premium discount of this leg. So that means that when we come down here, although we haven't quite mitigated the 4-hour demand and the M15 demand, there's increased probabilities now that this pullback is finished and now we're ready to go. So that doesn't have to happen. Of course, we could continue to have that movement and we could come in here to here before we go, or maybe because we've had the swing pull back up into premium supply, maybe this is just going to keep going and we will take out this low, right? Anything can happen, but that's not the point. The point is we're using that framework to understand what we expect for each piece of structure. And although, yes, this small internal structure could continue because it's a strong high, I don't really have massive confidence in that because, it's an increasing probability that this larger internal higher low may be forming, and we may be doing that. So even though I understand that and I have this thought process, this is again where, my psychology, or I don't really, it's one of those things that's a bit tricky because I look at this and I understand all the possibilities we've just gone through. And I know this isn't that high probability, but I guess I'm just thinking, well, if I can get a pullback into here and this is what my thinking actually was, is that I can follow the M5 order flow, look for a move into here, take full profits with the expectation that the larger high low isn't going to form until we at least come down into this 4-hour demand. That was basically my sort of justification and reasoning behind wanting to kind of be aggressive and look for the continuation of that M5 order flow, because I thought potentially, that larger internal high low or even just a pullback of this leg isn't going to happen until we touch it. That was my expectation. So basically looking for this as one leg, and I'm just trying to capture the continuation of that move, even though that's low probability, because after the boss, that pullback to here, that small internal pullback, can happen at any moment. And typically these previous highs of supply, they become the internal range liquidity. That price breaks and takes that liquidity to then fuel that move to the downside. So that's why after any break of structure where you keep trying to follow that order flow, it becomes riskier. Yes, they can play out, but at any point that can happen. Okay, and that's why it's low probability, and you should pick your battles for when you do that. For instance, doing it kind of right at the start of the move up here, when momentum is very strong, maybe you can get away with it, right? Get away with kind of aggressively following these levels, because although it's after a pullback, right, you can get away with it a bit more when, we had the start of that 4-hour move. I don't want to bring in any necessary confusion with more variables at the moment. But the main lesson I'm trying to say here is that after a break of structure, that pullback's likely to happen. So if you keep trying to short on the lower time frames to follow that move, it's risky because you have minimal stop loss protection if we do get that pullback. Also, with the other negative confluence, right, is that we pull back quite deep. So there's the increased probability that large low could be in place. So hopefully I haven't lost some of you. I'm sure I have, with all those who haven't watched Advanced Technical Analysis or you just new. You don't have to get this tricky with price. You can just wait for things to be a lot more aligned. But hopefully it does. Some of you are able to follow. But I'm just trying to explain why I took a trade here, but it's just not high probability. Okay, so same basically analysis as the previous one. Just looking to follow this order flow at this point and expecting this strong M5 high to hold. But again, doesn't have great confluence because there was no inducement in the leg, and the POI, the immediate POI that I was looking to trade from didn't sweep. However, I did at least like that this high got swept here, especially as this was a high that took out a low, right? Because we had structure like this, right? That high then took out the low, which means there's a decent then build up of buy stops behind that high, which price then came up and took, and then led to the downside of the movement. So that at least had some more liquidity going for it, but really it's coming down to the point of structure, right? We're expecting that pullback after the break of this level. We're expecting that deeper pullback up to here, and shorting from here is just pretty dumb / aggressive. So got tagged into the trade, eventually took quite a while, right? And it started to play out really nicely. So I was thinking, okay, so this is where I was just lined up 5R, stop just above the high. I think I had a 3-pip stop to cover this high here, just in case. Maybe could have got away with a 2-pip and then I would have got my 5R. But what I was basically looking to do is just target just before that low there. Got pretty close. Now at this point I did think, because this is a low probability trade, at least we've broken this low here. Maybe now I could trail to break even. But then I was like, well, this is the week low I'm targeting. Price could come up into the supply. That broke this low and continue the movement down. So I just decided to accept the risk and left it out, and then eventually got smashed. So it is what it is. Low probability trade. Majority of you, I would advise, do as I say, not as I do, and don't follow me into these types of trades, especially with the current market conditions, because I'm basically just entering at terrible value in the middle of this internal range of the internal range after we've had that small internal break of structure and we're expecting that pullback, and we pull down into the discount of the large internal leg. It's just a poor trade. It really is a poor trade. But the reasoning behind it was I was looking for price to have one more leg into here before getting that pullback into here and then that movement. But I should have just sat on my hands, listened to my gut, and waited for price to come up to here. Now, again, that said, it comes back to the M15 though, especially as it was coming to end the session, as price is coming into here. It's tricky because, yes, again, I'm going to keep saying it so hopefully it sinks in. This is a strong internal high, and there's always a possibility that we could at least get one more movement down into here, right? And also with the possibility that we could actually take out the weak swing low because we have had the overall swing pullback, okay? But I'm kind of leaning more towards the larger internal structure. We've had a decent pullback. Yes, we didn't quite pull into here, but I just think there's an increased probability that could be the move to go, especially when you consider what this low is. This dotted line is what? It's the 4 hour. Remember where we are on the 4 hour. We've come right into the extreme of that strong low, and there's always the possibility now we've had that 4 hour bullish chalk to do what? To continue this larger movement. So that's why, it's just not great at the moment. There's a lot of mixed narratives here. The other thing as well is what I said in my pre-session analysis was I didn't really like this POI because if you look back here, right, the distal had already been mitigated when it was created because price came down, it created that demand, and then this next candle pulled in, tapped into that demand, and then continued the movement. Likewise here, right, this one had been tapped into, continued the movement. That came into those sell to buy weights, continued the movement. That came in and continued the movement. So if you actually follow that along, the next unmitigated M15 POI is technically this level here, right? Which increases, again, another tick in the box for confluences for the reasoning as to why this pullback may be over and that movement came in. And actually, if you looked at it in this way, you potentially could have looked for some longs from within here to try and anticipate that movement. So yeah, as price came into here, you could have taken some shorts. But yeah, you can see, I think this high is probably likely to go, and I just don't like the look of it. There was nowhere here really clear to set a risk entry, right? That's not a zone I would set a risk entry on. It didn't sweep. It has no inducement. It's kind of just like trickles down and then price goes. So that's where I'd be waiting for a confirmation entry. But if we zoom into here, we didn't get a chock until here. And this is right at the end of the session. You see 10 a.m. London time. And also this is all like really corrective. There's no clear POI here for me to enter on. And yeah, but it comes down to structure being king. So I appreciate I've kind of said a lot there, and sometimes it's quite hard to unpack everything in my mind. But if you guys, for any of you who do have quite a firm grasp of the internal structure framework that we use, basically trying to trade from strong structure and targeting weak structure, and then you just layer each layer that comes in there as many as you want, then you can understand that when you have very mixed narratives, it's hard to trade, and you don't have to trade it. That's kind of, I guess, one big thing I'd want you to take away from. So if we think about swing structure, we had the lower low, we pull back up into this level, and there's a decent probability that that swing lower high could be forming and we could be going. But really, we only get confirmation that this swing pullback is finished and that lower high is potentially going to be in place once the large internal structure has also shifted bearish. But at this moment, the large internal structure is bullish, and we've had a pullback into this level, so I'm expecting that movement. When we had then the small internal structure as well, right? Because I would have drawn it from here, but it never closed below, okay? So technically you can have it like this, right? When that shifted bearish here, right, we could then look for that movement to then get another movement into here. But because we've already pulled back into the discount of this leg, there's an increased probability, right, that high low is done. And that's the only reason likely why the small internal structure shifted bearish, was just to facilitate what? To facilitate the pullback of the large structure. Such a mouthful, I know, sorry, it's probably painful to listen to then continue that movement. So this is why I can see why this might hold, and it might go, and it could be the movement that leads to there, but I don't have high conviction in it, so I don't have to trade it. If I miss the move, I miss the move, okay? So this is why at this moment I'd probably rather just wait for that movement into here and then look to see if you can get a short, right? With the minimum expectation, it will just be that larger pullback into the strong internal low, and then that's why you can either then look for a long from within here to then continue that movement, or take a lot of your profits, or hold onto some volume in the anticipation that maybe the swing structure will hold and will go. But this is where you have to, there's a lot of bullish confluence here. One, because this is that strong for large internal low, so there's always a possibility we're going to get that move. Also, I'm not 100% convinced that this is the M15 strong swing, because you could view that as a swing pullback, that as a swing pullback, and then potentially the M15 swing structure has switched bullish. So then technically, right, we'd expect this to be a strong swing low, and we're looking for that movement here, and this high really isn't anything. This high could just be old supply to facilitate the pullback to continue that movement. So that's why I'm holding all of those different possibilities in my head, and it's just a little bit tricky. Price action is not great at the moment, and that's why just try to trade from strong structure where you see it, and just be a lot more nimble with your targets. Okay? Hopefully I haven't confused too many of you there. It's not the best price action in the world, but yeah, hopefully it makes some sense. Watch it as many times as you need, and I can answer any questions you may have if it will help. Cheers, guys.